Good evening, our dear and beloved audience. This is our 7th podcast. This is Dr. Jeff coming at you with my good friend Timothy and Jim.
Howdy, howdy.
Evening.
And we're going to press forward into the third of our, what we think are fairly deep questions, this where are we going? If you haven't heard the previous podcast, we started out with where are we coming from, or where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? We have a wide range of different perspectives to try to come at this, and it is not our purpose to try to have the answer, more just to stimulate thought and feeling and get a discussion going about this. And you might say, why? Why does it matter? Well, I don't know that it does, but there are a few curious folks on the planet. I'm one of them. I think there are at least 2 others here in the room that at least want to play along and see where we can push this and what comes from it. We were talking before our podcast tonight, just the anticipation of getting together each week and seeing what comes at us, what shows up, what we can have a riff with. That's without a T, by the way, according to Timothy. And just have some fun with. So that's where we're coming from tonight. I'd like to start off with sharing some lyrics from a song that has been done numerous times. The song is called Where Are We Going? And this version of the song was taken from the video game Call of Duty, which I don't know much about other than it's done very well. As far as lots of sales, and apparently a lot of people play it. Jim was pointing out a few moments ago that Marvin Gaye has done a version of it, and also...
It's not the same song, but a song called Where Are You Going, which is in Godspell.
Yeah, okay. So the lyrics are, where are we going from here? Where do we go? Are we all blinded by fear? How do we know? How do we know? Where do we go? Where do we go? How do we know? Where do we go? Where are we going from here? How do we know? Where do we go? Where are we going from here? Do we let go of all we know? Are we all blinded from fear? Where do we go when we let go? I feel I'm falling from here. Don't let me go. Is it the calling? We hear, we hear. How do we know? So if you're listening to the song and you see the title, like, oh, somebody's going to give me the answer. Well, not really, not really at all. But there were kind of a couple interesting things that you could pick out of there. This whole idea of being blinded by fear, and is it a calling? Those were 2 key points that jumped out from that. Did you get anything from that, Timothy? Just the lyrics?
That's kind of what I was picking up on, was the blinded fear and the don't let me go. I was trying to source out what that meant. Who's he talking to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the game to really offer any
I don't think it's the game.
opinion on
I
that.
think that's a
The game, I think, was focused on the lyric, is it the calling?
okay.
Since it's Call of Duty. At least that's what I could pull out of it. But Jim, what'd you get?
Well, obviously the piece about fear speaks to the differences in the paths that we all take. Some go further and some go less into that path, and the further you go into that path, the harder it is to feel like you're going anywhere. But the other thing that really was resonating strongly for me is this idea of know thyself. Prior to what you're hearing recorded, Jeff had gotten into talking about diet and trying to find credible information about what to do and how to do it, and how there's so many opposing viewpoints about the same things, and this food's good for you this week, and next week it causes cancer, and last week it caused Alzheimer's, and I just think it seems, for me anyway, that it all comes down to know thyself, because your body, your energy, your system is very unique. And while there are lots of things that you can potentially do, if you don't know yourself, you can't make choices to serve yourself. So it becomes important that become the priority, which is about not engaging fear, but engaging self in a much greater way. Then you'd make choices that serve this vessel that brought this personality here. And so you have a much more responsive system. Which is one of the things I think is brilliant about Chinese medicine, is it's about the individual system.
Yep.
It's not about human systems. It's your system and your system and your system, because they're all so radically different, even though they're constructed from the same materials.
Mm-hmm.
How we utilize them energetically, how we integrate them based on our consciousness, based on the core vibration that we carry is vastly different. I mean, my own personal experience, I remember in training, when I was training with Hard Brain Living, that I was kind of put off because, so many people would show up there and then kind of jump on the bandwagon. And what I mean, the bandwagon was, they'd be eating vegetarian, and they'd be drinking kombucha, and they'd be doing all the spiritual things and eating all the spiritual foods, and I found that very irritating because I had no interest,
But why irritation, if you don't mind? Why would that be?
Because it's just one more face. It's one more thing to slap on to make me feel better or think I'm doing better, or it really wasn't driven from some place of my body. This is what I'm being moved to. This is what I'm supposed to do. Because if I do this,
but you know for sure what everyone else was experiencing?
I don't know for sure, but I know based on conversations. I know based on being there and watching it happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think and quite honestly, I think it's a.
I feel great when I eat vegetables and drink kombucha. Yeah,
and I do too. Mm-hmm. But it isn't the choices for that. And your pushback for me about that is the belief that it's always the good thing, and it's not, because it's different for every person. Some people resonate well with it, others don't. Some do it when they're around people that.
Yeah, I was just curious why you were irritated. But why?
It was the bandwagon.
Yeah, it's the bandwagon.
Johnny completely.
Yeah, I have an issue with anyone that goes on bandwagons. I have a struggle when I listen to things getting that this is the way. Because there is no this is the way. There is, you're walking your path, I'm walking my path, and there may be things we agree with, but because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for me. Because vibrationally, the way you use your energy is vastly different from the way I use my energy. So it's, anyway, long-winded, but the point of the experience, where I was getting to with that, had to do more with, at that point, I was completely satisfied with the fact that I liked meat and I loved to eat meat and I ate it all the time. And there was no reason that I could see, and I would say that to people, I'm like, I have no reason to not eat it. If my body says at some point it's time, then I'll look at that. I'll deal with that. But right now, this is what, 5-6 years ago, it was not even something that I thought was valuable to me, because my body didn't go, oh yeah, let's do that, And I thought kombucha was nasty anyway, but that was then. that was years ago. To flash forward to a year ago, actually, if I start in two directions, it was 4 years ago. It was a spontaneous experience of going off of gluten, which was another one of those things that...
Bandwagon.
No. At the time, it wasn't. No, and this was a purely personal thing. I woke up one morning and I was walking across the living room and I heard in my head, "No more wheat." What the hell does that mean? But the transition was easy and natural, and has never been an issue. And then a year ago, the same thing happened with animal protein. went away. Don't need it. Don't deal with it. Don't care who does. I mean, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other what people do with that. But it's made me scratch my head a lot since then, because it was never in my lexicon of experience to say, geez, I want to be a vegetarian, or I don't want to eat gluten. And I don't have any, and interestingly enough, it's just a natural progression. Don't know why, don't care, because it's organic and it's easy, and that's what my body is calling for. So the whole point of that is going back to what I was saying about know thyself. That, if a week from now I had some huge craving to eat a hamburger, I don't have a problem eating a hamburger, if that's what the body really needs. But I think it's all about taking it in here first.
Yeah.
It's a long way around that block, but...
And what's interesting about that, and what we didn't get a chance to record that we had a miscue on earlier, was sometimes our bodies might crave something, but the reasons for that craving may not be because it's the highest choice for the body.
Mm-hmm.
Parasites, tapeworm, kind of thing, can get a hold and run the show and make us crave things that it wants. There are very interesting reasons why we have particular cravings based on deficiencies in the body. But I'm on board with the idea that these lyrics, where do we go from here, and how do we know, and all that. I think we're really better off when we do have a intimate relationship with the innate within. And I think that can create a lot of peace, and the kind of peace that I have the pleasure of knowing most of the time, that keeps these questions kind of the volume down pretty low on them. I think I find them interesting, even compelling at times, but they're not keeping me up at night. And I was curious about you, Jeff. What was it about these lyrics that spoke to you? What really stood out for you?
That the question can't be answered, or
right.
That it's so. Most of those lyrics were just question after question, repeated question. There wasn't really anything in there other than apparently fear shows up a lot. And is there such thing as a calling?
Yeah, because he's saying we hear, but how do we know? And I think that gets to your point, as if we know ourselves. There's a lot of voices in the world. If we're hearing our gut, hearing a higher vibratory calling, I think when we know ourselves, we're clearer on that. We're not. There's a lot of people getting confused because there's a lot of voices out there.
I want to tell a story about two trees. I have two trees in my backyard that, for all practical purposes, from a scientific experiment, they're oriented in such a way that they both get the same amount of sunlight from the morning sun, the afternoon sun, and the evening sun. So there's never one tree that is shading the other. These trees are of the same size, they're of the same age, they're planted in the same soil, they get the same water, they have the same fertilizer. There is nothing at all that one tree gets that the other doesn't in any way. I imagined one day going out and sitting under the trees and listening to a conversation between the two of them, if that were possible. Both making life for squirrels and birds and other things. And they, interestingly enough, they're fruit-bearing trees, and they flower at the same time of year, and they take quite a long time for the fruit to grow because it's large fruit, and they are harvested at roughly the same time each year. So for all practical purposes, these trees are literally identical trees. But one is a grapefruit tree, and the other is an avocado tree. And so think about that for a moment, if you will. that how does the grapefruit tree know how to make a grapefruit and the avocado tree know how to make an avocado with all of the ingredients being identically the same? And you know, an avocado is very, very different than grapefruit. And I was imagining the two trees talking to each other about how one might think it was better or more valuable than another. Particularly the avocado tree may say to the grapefruit tree, you know, my fruit is more precious and valuable than yours. It's, you know, peak season. It's you can buy 2 of me for $1, and the grapefruits you got to pitch up 5 of you for $1. So you know you're not worth as much. That's probably relative to where you live, but I think this is a relevant metaphor for this idea that, you know, we could add another 2 or 3 trees to the mix, and all of them producing different fruit from all of the same basic ingredients: soil and fertilizer and sunshine and water, breeze. You can throw all the variables in there. And that's like us people. We're walking around kind of coming from the same stuff, but all being so darn different. And maybe a botanist would say, well, you know, you really shouldn't give your grapefruit tree and your avocado tree the same fertilizer. And that might be true, but tell my trees that. They don't seem to care. They kind of dig in the same thing. But so it's almost like the more you specialize in something, the more division there is. It's like you get into the little details. I've always fed my trees basically the same thing. And again, if you were a real specialist in this, some people would say, you would never give an avocado tree this. You would never do that to a grapefruit tree. Well, tell them that. They're loaded every year. At the end of the year, they're all going, oh, we did a good job again this year, right? So when we read these books and we listen to podcasts and whatnot, we hear people tell us to do this and don't do that. I have to agree with Jim that it's interesting, maybe, and perhaps men are like sheep and easily led to the slaughter, and that would largely be, in my opinion, because we aren't willing to do our own thinking, or we aren't willing to slow down and stop for a moment and go, does this really make any sense? Does it really make any sense? Can we wake up enough to pay attention and just look around and go, okay, I don't really want to be in the herd. Maybe there's safety in numbers, and that would go back to the fear-based thing that if you just keep your head down and go to work every day and pay your taxes and all that, you'll be okay. But I don't think the three of us are interested in that particular path, and that doesn't mean it's the wrong path. Just we're trying to push into a different area. So, did you guys get anything out of my metaphor of the story of the trees? Did you find that interesting at all?
I did. Yeah. I thought you were going to go another direction with it. I thought you were going to. I thought they were going to be the same tree, same type of tree, and one was going to be greater at its fruit bearing, and on, and then it got me thinking about the roots, and maybe it has to tap into some water down below, but yeah, I think it's a brilliant metaphor. I don't, there's a lot of things that when left pretty much alone and left to its own devices, a lot of times when we get out of the way of what nature wants to do, nature does just fine. Mm-hmm. And I think that our bodies are a lot of the same way. And getting back to what Jim was talking about knowing yourself, being able to tune in, and you kind of breeze through pretty quickly about some nutritional concepts, and it might be fun to break that down a little bit further at some point. It doesn't have to be right now, but I do think there are some things that we can know about what our individual experience is, and dialing into that.
That I'll go with. That for somebody when they say, I've done this for this long and these were the results I've gotten.
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
But please don't tell me that that's what I need to do, or write a book and say this is what everybody needs to do. That's where it all goes sideways.
In Gundry's examples of being at it for 30 years as a cardiologist, and he's got a little more street cred than just someone spouting off at Sprouts or something. He's done the surgeries and he's seen. So I do think there is some credence to the idea of lectins, to what degree you carry it and get consumed by that. It's I think that might be a little bit silly. I'm very much the same way, Jim. I didn't eat much meat. I wasn't craving it for a while, and then my body just started craving some meat, and I'll absolutely eat it and try to get something that is consciously harvested. That to me feels better, and I don't think it's just me reading a label and going, "Oh, I feel good. That chicken, got a suntan before, before I died or something." I care about the vibratory experience of all living creatures, and I think there are people. I don't mind paying almost twice as much for meat that has the way I saw cows growing up. The way I did, where cows were out eating grass and they had a little bit of grain before they were sent off to just to fatten them up just a little bit, but they mostly knew grain, and that's what their stomachs are designed for. I think that has a very different health benefit for the bovine, but yeah, I think it'd be very interesting to see what would happen if people who like meat, if they would be able to go and kill what they're eating. And what's funny is that most people that I talk to say that they wouldn't be able to do that. I think they would be able to do that if they were starving, but if there was plant-based opportunities all around, they would feel terrible about going and slitting the throat of a lamb or whatever the meat source was. I think that'd be an interesting litmus test to see who so you're a meat eater, okay? Here's your hatchet. Go get your meat. I wonder how many people would, because we are a little anesthetized from not having to take part in that.
A little? Just a little? How about completely?
Completely.
Most people in Southern California have never had their hands completely immersed in blood.
Yeah.
In anything that they've killed.
Right. I was having sushi down the road one time, and there was a sorority group of girls that were sitting by this giant fish tank. And the fish tank is there because that's how fresh the fish is. They catch it in the ocean, they bring it, and then they keep it. And so this girl is just eating, and she's loud, she's drinking and everything, and then she ordered something, and the waiter came up and asked if she would like to pick out which one of the... And she had a mouthful of fish, and she was like, "Are you serious? Are you going to kill that fish?" And she's got a mouthful of fish, but the idea that she was dining next to this thing that was living, she couldn't eat anymore. Like, it just totally... She had this moment. It was really funny from where I was sitting, but she was completely traumatized. She couldn't eat any more fish, just having that kind of exposure. But I think that we are blinded by all kinds of things. I think that there was fear keeping her from understanding what has to happen to get that protein source into her system. I think there's little juxtapositions the way that we look at death in our society compared to how the Buddhists do it, where you go and you just bring the person home and you have parties and food and you cry and you sing and you don't have it antiseptic and anesthetized in a like a clinical setting. It's just I think we are absolutely immersed in fear, and where do we go from here, boys? Where do we go from here?
Well, we're immersed in capitalism, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And because everything all those processes are driven off of capitalist ventures. They're driven off of the need to mass produce food and mass produce the food that they want you to buy. So it's that creates for an interesting dilemma, but it in a way, I think it really is quite a powerful, what's the word that I want? Well, it's a powerful parallel in that, for me, more and more I see those macrocosm, microcosm experiences where, or the underpinnings of things, and realizing, and it's a little challenging because it really ruins a lot of things. I think part of the journey in consciousness is you become less attached to the mass conscious ideal, and that's being fed and stimulated constantly, and particularly with fear. I think it's interesting that fear showed up in the third line of this song, because I think fear is the greatest, most manipulated tool there is on the planet, and continues to be. And that as long as that is what drives your ship, you're less likely to know where you're going, and you're less likely to have any clue of where you're going, and feeling. I think the questions that show up here are interesting only because they talk about. They don't talk about much actually. Except not knowing, where are we going from here? Are we blinded by fear?
The whole.
And I feel I'm falling down. I'm curious if this is this a song outside of this game, or is this a song that was created for this game?
It's both. Yeah.
It can't be both. Was the song written before the game ever was created?
But then
they
took it and made it for the game. Yeah.
Made it fit the.
Because to me, if I just came across that, I would think that this was a very insecure person who was full of fear that wrote that. It doesn't sound... It sounds like the kind of thing you'd want someone to think to pull the trigger and kill things, because it's... Call of Duty's pretty much about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, just being kind of lost and not really knowing, and not having an attachment to any inspired thought, or And I think that's where a lot of people are, and I don't quite understand that because, and I don't know what it is, and I might just have my elevator may not quite go to the top floor, but I have a tremendous amount of peace, and I'm grateful for that. I've done a lot of work to get there, but some of it was with you, but I'm not wondering. I'm not feeling like I'm falling from here. Like if I found out that something was wrong with me and I didn't have long to be here, I'm sure that would be hard, and there's going to be some semblance of attachment to this experience, and like thinking I'm going to be missing out on something. But I like what Mark Twain said about death. He says, I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years prior to this existence, and I didn't suffer the slightest inconvenience. And I feel that's kind of how I feel, and forgive me if I've used that one before, but I'm not worried about that, and I am interested in where we're headed. I'm interested in how we can maximize our potential and get the 7 billion plus souls on this planet in a little bit or a lot more unified flow, because it just feels like when my mama was born, there were a quarter of the people that exist on the planet now. And she's still alive, and that's spooky to me, and it seems like things are just getting a little bit more and more and more off the rails, and I'd I'd like to talk to you guys and get your opinions on things like tipping points. How many people of a certain caliber of consciousness are going to have the potential to begin to create changes? What do those changes look like? What are we, what are we visualizing? What are we hoping for? What are we endeavoring for the future of our species? Some big stuff, but I don't think that there's a lot of people thinking on that level, as you were mentioning earlier. And if we can't see it in any visualization, in any goal setting, you got to start having a picture of what it is that you want to attract. And I think it's just all willy-nilly, and people swiping and on to the next and on to the next. And I do feel like technology, as brilliant as it is damaging our capacity to be present with one another, and especially the young people. That's all they've known. There's little babies with freaking cell phones in their hands at the grocery store, and that becomes this whole reality. I understand it's a great way to anesthetize a child for a moment to keep them quiet, but what do you guys think about any of that?
I do think kids should be quiet.
Amen, brother.
Oh, I do too.
I struggle, and this comes back to your question to me of earlier about the people who get on the bandwagon. One of the issues that I had with the gentleman who created Higher Brain Living was and is this underlying use of fear to promote a concept, because he talks about tipping point. He talks about he goes into the whole thing of the Renaissance was stimulated by about, I think it was like 1,000 people that it took to shift that cultural revolution. Mm-hmm. And the words sound great, but the underlying message in that particular thing, not about the tipping point, but where the tipping point is now. We need you. The world needs you. The world is in a dire place, and we need to come together in like mind to help create this tipping point so that we can usher in this blah 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 blah. And it's like, really, if it isn't all here to be embraced and understood or utilized, then why is it here? We assume that this thing happening with the child and the telephone is a bad thing. But why do we assume that? Well, we assume that because they say that the EMFs coming from the phone cause disruptions in the energy. But who's to say that that child is not already adapted to that? Because we assume that we're not somehow adapting to energetically, physically, biologically, that just because it's created here and there are new life coming here, that you also have the juxtaposition of these very young people who are coming here being able to do things that are absolutely ridiculous.
Sure.
Right? More so than I can ever remember in my lifetime. That this evolution of beings coming on this planet that are capable of things that are kind of mind-blowing, But anyway, I go back
to answer because there was a question in there, just so we don't get too far away from it. My experience with parents telling me that what happened to their kid once they got a phone and how they checked out. It changed them, and I watched it here with my nephew that I took on for a year. We had a great relationship. We meditate, we go to yoga and all that. His parents sent him a phone, and it was just instantly, the kid just checked out. He just was absolutely unavailable. So it's not that I read that somewhere, and I'm sure I could read that, and I actually have read that for other people, but just in talking with people, this inner relatability can get diminished if there's not a balance in that kind of thing.
And there's the key, which goes back to the idea of know thyself. in the sense that if, as an adult, as a parent, if I can't just distance myself from this object, then that's step one. If I can't distance myself, then how could I expect my young child to distance myself? So that becomes the responsibility of each individual to create those what do you call them, boundaries with them, because it's not all bad and it's not all good. It has its purpose and its function. It's just a question of how are we adapting and growing to what we are growing and adapting. You know what I mean? We're creating technology. You know, there's a book. What's it called? I'll have to remember it. She's it's the Watchman's Rattle. Something to that effect. She talks quite a lot about this, the paradigm that we've created because we have created problems that our rational mind can't solve, and that the only way to solve them is to create a way to shift state, a way to energize a different, a way to elevate the vibration, so that it comes from the place of solution, not from the place of problem.
Right.
And that most of our problems now are as we look at the world and as we look at what's happening with our government and the governments of the different parts of the world, it's the same idea. It's this, the problems are so much greater than our mind's ability to comprehend and deal with. And I think that all of those things, whether they're telephones or whether they're, whatever they are, is it's all finding out and understanding how it's, instead of it all being bad and wrong. Oh my God, telephones are horrible, they cause cancer and brain tumors, and now they have EMFs that really rock your system and blah. Instead of that approach, which is all fear-driven, why not look at it from the perspective of this produces something, and it may or may not be useful within our energy system, don't know, but we've created it.
Do you wear a seatbelt?
It's here.
Like,
It took me a long time.
Why do you wear a seatbelt?
Now it's a habit.
Yeah. But I mean, what's the original?
I fought it for years. I thought it was the stupidest thing. I don't need to be regulated.
And I get that spirit about you.
I don't need to be.
We know that that's
So it's like, okay.
the statistical probabilities of surviving most of the accidents we can get into, our seatbelts are pretty effective for that. I don't have to run a fear tape to wear a seatbelt and get the benefits of a seatbelt.
True, but I also don't know that based on what I've read, that's actually 100% true. That people actually died more when they didn't wear seatbelts than they do now.
You would never know.
You would never know. So somebody made that up somewhere and said
it's not a made up thing. Every single crash scene, every single shark attack, that they know about where people survive shark attacks.
Who's they?
The Surfrider Foundation. I listened to a gentleman that has investigated every single shark attack for the last 40 years on the West Coast. They piecemeal everything together to see what the weather was like that day, what that person had eaten, and just they break things down. Every single accident, when they tape off the roadway, they're going through and they're collecting data. And that data goes into a system, and that system breaks down some algorithms of what's all at hand when certain things go down. There are things we can know. It's not just people taking guesses. There are a lot of places where people are taking guesses at things, but there are places where science and empirical data actually serves us. And
to the degree that it's isolated and separated, because every piece of data does not include that individual's interaction in that experience or those individuals' interactions, meaning that accident occurred because of the two individual energies that were participating in that experience. And rather than deal with that piece of it, we take that out of the equation and then extrapolate on the physical leftovers to say, this is what we need to do now to fix this. I'm like, no, that's not what we need to do to fix it. There's nothing to fix. This happened because these two souls came together in an experience. The cars didn't do it. The cars didn't create it. We created the cars.
So we don't. So in your mind, we really don't need seatbelts. You're just doing it because you don't want a ticket.
Probably, yeah. And it's a habit.
Please, please, please tie this back to the question. How did we get to seatbelts and shark attacks?
He was talking about he was going there and then went to seatbelts
Well,
and shark
what
attacks.
point were we talking about that we wound up there? Let's just get back.
Yeah.
Don't have to drop it. Just connect it.
Where are we going from here? Whenever I'm thinking about these, I was speaking about how kids, if we're getting a visualization of what it is that we want to have and experience on this planet, and we have all these ways that people can be completely checked out at will, and I mostly when I look around when I'm in a bank line or something, this is happening. Back when people would be talking,
Yep.
and you might meet your neighbor. When this is happening, it's nice. I get it. I get the convenience of that, but I feel like this is something that needs to be addressed to find some balance.
It's out of balance for sure.
Out of balance.
Yeah, do that when you're by yourself, but put it away when you're at the bank.
Absolutely, and just simply when there's a dinner happening. People ought to just not oughta, but I have much more enjoyment when I'm with people who aren't checking their junk.
Well, they're dopamine fiends at that point. We've
Absolutely.
talked about that
It's an
before,
addiction.
how it's a dopamine
Yeah.
response. So, yeah. I want to throw something at you guys. One of my mentors, Greg Braden, and you got to meet Chris Thorson, who came down and did that conference, that weekend thing that you did at my house, and we were all in the hot tub together afterwards.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Oh,
Couple
yeah.
years
The
back?
Aikido guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chris turned me on to this idea that we start out, there's a school of thought that we start out on the planet as a mineral, and we get to experience what that's like, being a mineral.
Huh.
And we evolve to a rock or some conglomeration of a mineral. And then and we might hang out there for like a long time. We become a plant, and maybe we do a couple of different plants. Then we evolve into an insect, and then become a fish, and move our way up to a variety of animals. And then we're here at the top of the food chain as people. So imagine if it really did start all the way back that way.
Huh.
And by the time we get here, we've freaking been here a lot, done a whole lot of different things, and somehow at a very subconscious or unconscious level have some idea of why it's important to put your water on the plants instead of just dumping it down the sink at some level,
Right.
I shouldn't say lesser, but at a different level than consciousness, just because we live in a desert area and they're trying to conserve and follow the social norms or whatever, but that we do really understand those relationships because we've been and had all of those experiences. It's just an very, very interesting idea. But that there would also be different levels, like, being a squirrel would be different than being a dolphin. And so there would be like this advancement, perhaps, of working your way up. And it may sound biased, and I don't mean it to be, but there might be humans on the planet that are at lower levels of advancement or evolution. I'm not going to say which ones they are, because that would totally be not, uncool. But let's just go with the idea that maybe that's the case, and they might be the ones that are just very self-absorbed and not thinking so much about their neighbor or what they can do to keep care of the garden. and they would really just, again, be more about me, an I guy, as I call him, as opposed to a we person. So then, if there's that sort of an evolution in the chain of coming here and having this experience, and even not just all of that happening here, but there might be other planets that we get to interact with. And I was a rock on that planet, and a squirrel on that planet, and a pine tree here, and different experiences like that. That with regard to our spirit and our soul, there's also an elevated experience. And some people would say that with regard to our humanity, that there would be people that have a green hue, a blue hue, a purple hue, and a white hue. And those would be different levels of awareness and advancement or evolution of their soul type. In David Hawkins' work, he was knighted. Doesn't mean anything really, but he did enough to get some queen's attention and do the hominy, and you're pretty amazing to write all these books and be an MD doctor and also a psychologist. And he's the guy that really got muscle testing recognized as a science. Huh. And he developed this numerical frequency system for how things vibrate, and using muscle testing as a way of evaluating what the human body and mind, like pick music for example, that he had a scale from 0 to 1,000, and that there was music that resonated say at 300, and then there was a different genre of music that would resonate at 400, and gangster rap is down at 100, and there was this line that they came up with, his organization or these people that studied all of this, that there's a line where there's a frequency of fear, and it shows up in food types, it shows up in belief systems, and it shows up in religious organization types, and they've muscle tested all of this. And that Jesus and Buddha and say Krishna, as they thought about and looked and studied at their works, were the people that were resonating or did resonate at the 800, 900, and 1,000 level. And that any one time there might have only been 5 or 6 people on the planet that were resonating and vibrating at that level. But it was fascinating to me to consider that the idea would be for us to get up and stay out of that fear level in what we eat, what we think, what kind of music we listen to, what we expose ourselves to. Not that you can't do that stuff, but truly we are what we eat, we are who our friends are, we are, where we go, what we do is kind of how we vibrate, right? We vibrate together, for better or for worse. So I was talking about going from beginning existence of possibly being a mineral, and by the time you get to humanity, you've had a lot of experiences, and even within the idea of being here on this planet in human form, there being varying degrees of evolved beings that, according to our spirit guides and guardian angels, they can identify us by the color that we show up as. So that's kind of a trip. And the color isn't a new thing. We would call that an aura. And there are, I can't recall the specific type of photographic imaging that's done, but I did go to a conference once where, for $20 you could have your picture taken, and it would show, the type of aura that was around you.
What's interesting is that 100 years ago, maybe a little over 100 years ago, conversations about people who could see that.
Right.
You could go to jail for talking about that in certain parts of our country.
Well, the idea is that we've shrunk it because it's became a bad thing and we didn't want to show it. But there was a time when you would walk around and, oh, hey, way to go, purple dude, and blue dude, or whatever, But it was interesting that this booth at this conference I attended, that you could get your picture taken and it would show your color. There was also a personality that went along with that color, and there was an ideal occupation for you in that color. There were merchants and teachers and ministers and warriors and that sort of thing based on the different colors.
Was it your understanding that that color could change based on what was in your constitution that day? Or was it sort of an inherent baseline color?
Yeah, pretty much baseline.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
But I don't know that there's any set rules that if you change your friends and you change what you're reading, that you couldn't shift that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, the where are we going piece is staying focused on that, or trying to stay focused on that. Going from this three-dimensional experience that we have here on this planet into the fourth dimension. And so you have, dot, line, cube, and the fourth dimension would be cube in a cube. This is the idea where to begin to vibrate at this faster frequency is an individual goal that we have in where are we going, as well as a planetary and a species goal of where we're going. And Penny Pierce, in her book Frequency, talks about the movement that's happening on the planet right now, where we're making a shift from data and facts and logic and concrete functioning and hard science to an intuitive knowing. And that being the far greater way of knowing something is intuitively. And I do not know how it has happened with me, but it absolutely has happened with me in the last decade. Two decades ago, I was flying, at that time, the most advanced flying machine ever created with 3 computers and being able to fly it upside down and day, night, landed on an aircraft carrier at sea. I couldn't do that today. And it's not just because I've gotten older. It's not about I forgot how or my muscle time and response times are different or whatever. It's my brain doesn't work that way anymore.
Interesting.
Absolutely does not work that way anymore. Even in having this conversation with you, I wouldn't have had to write notes a decade ago of what I wanted to talk about and getting the mineral and then the rock and that. Or I would have just been able to go pop, 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 and spit it right out. And then just go from concept to thought, pop, 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 and just, because it was all right here. I had it. It was all just right there. And it was all, and I could select from it and point to it, and it all kind of was organized. And it was really nice
and
right
for
there.
Those of you at home, what he was doing was reacting to something sort of encroaching on his left brain. I don't know if you meant to do that, but that was
absolutely, absolutely.
And I think that speaks interesting and ties back to where we were going about science. I think science is amazing, but the whole purpose of science is to make sense of this illusion, ultimately. It's dissecting the illusion.
Yeah, we're trying to answer the question.
In trying to make sense of this physical reality. Right. And most of it, scientifically, most of it ignores the main function of what we're here. Which is energy. It completely ignors all of that. And focuses on...
We're not there yet. We're not at the frequency. We're still at the biology and the chemistry.
Yep. And so it makes it challenging for me, from my perspective, to embrace certain aspects of it, because it's not the cause. It's not the source. It's just a way of identifying components.
Sure.
It's a way of identifying.
Absolutely.
So I just kind of go, again, it's know thyself. It comes back to, where am I going? Well, using the seatbelt idea. Now it's a habit, so I don't think about it anymore. It's actually uncomfortable to not have the seatbelt, which is kind of remarkable to me, because it's not. It wasn't natural to. Wasn't natural to my experience to begin with.
Right.
So that speaks a lot to how behaviors get entrained into our experience. Mm-hmm. So if you can in some way govern it or make it manageable or controllable, and produce enough fear about it, then you can produce a result. And that seems to be how we focus people mostly. I don't know if that's true in every country in the world. I don't know. It's definitely endemic in our country. It's definitely a huge problem in our country. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing the results of that starting to fall apart and blow up in our faces, which is good, because it's forcing all of us to look at it from a very different perspective and begin to assess it. Where are we going? Look at where we are. Where are we going to go now with where we are?
So would you say that the missing piece of the equation at this point is our understanding of the energetic bodies? Do you mind speaking a little bit more to that, either of you? And what is the energy that, let's say, that a theoretical physicist isn't aware of or tapping into? What can we just...
I think it has to do with the marrying of idea, that it's not one or the other. It is... They know enough to know that this is all energy.
Yeah.
Right? They know enough to know that there are components within that can be altered and changed, but yet have gotten to the point of seeing how the direction and focus of energy changes, although that's beginning to happen in quantum
mechanics,
stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But isn't it interesting that even there, you have to specialize to go there. You have to have a desire to go beyond the illusion.
Yeah.
To go there.
Because you can't really measure it, because if you change the way it's being observed, like if
it changes it. Right.
And that starts getting me excited. That's where my notions of divinity begin to happen. And I think we talked about the slit experiment,
right?
And then what was going on with when they had a vacuum, and because there were scientists that had a perfect vacuum, and they were measuring the most perfect vacuum that we can create on Earth. And I think you can devoid everything except some electrons, I believe. And they were able to just kind of watch this random patterning of these electrons. I think they were protons, actually, and that were just flitting about in what we would consider a very random sequencing of just like flitting protons. And they thought to put a little bit of human DNA into the vessel, into the vacuum, and instantly these protons began formulating themselves into a particular pattern based on the relationship of having the intelligence of that DNA there. It was changing the subatomic reaction of that little piece of the universe was forever changed. And what I mean by that is, even after they removed the DNA, those subatomic particles remained in response, in a physical response to the input of the intelligence of the That to me is fun. Mm-hmm. That to me gets my juices flowing, because it's and it doesn't always have to be something observable, but I think that's a great place to start.
Well, see, everything that you said, all I heard was focus.
Yeah.
Focus.
Yeah.
Which is what we, at least now, more and more hear is what do you focus your thoughts on? How do you focus your energy? What do you focus, and I love that. I mean, it's down to the smallest level. Focus.
And one more thing, quantum entanglement. Subatomic particles that have been fused, they get split, they get sent through the Hebron collider away from each other at nearly the speed of light, and one goes through a maze and the other one does not. But because they were entangled, they behave. The one that's going through the maze goes through a certain thing, and the one that isn't going through the maze responds in the exact same way as its partner. Not at the speed of light, not like, oh, this thing happened, it got the signal. It happens at the exact same time. So, to me, that underpinning is the closest I know how to get to things with, like, what I would consider God or universal consciousness or something like that. And what can we do? We are so just scratching the surface of that kind of understanding. And what can understanding that instantaneous, what is that field that's connecting those two points? And I think Braden talks a little bit about that, doesn't he?
Right. We may not know what that field is, but we would call it a field.
Yeah.
That's maybe as much as we can do right now. Call it a field. On that notion, for the last half hour, I've been waiting to talk about the idea of a person that has multiple personalities show up in one state, in one personality type that exhibits diagnosable symptoms of diabetes, and when shifted into another personality type, they do not have the diabetes. Yeah, that is so well documented. I remember that like 25, 30 years ago.
Dang.
Yeah, and that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. Yeah,
that is amazing, and it makes sense. Like that rings true, but that's just that's
so
brilliant.
You get some scientists to try to wrap their head around that one, and they freaking go jump off bridges.
Yeah, and thank you, science, for being able to let us know that. Without science, we wouldn't know that exists because we have to measure those things. But yeah, it's incredible. Jeez Louise.
You've heard of phantom pain from amputees?
Yeah, indeed.
So what is that? Okay, so there obviously has to be a field.
Right.
Because if my arm that doesn't exist is telling me here that it really hurts, I look down, it's like, whoo, it's not there anymore. How can that exist? It isn't just a memory because it's happening right now. So there's a field. Because the arm's gone doesn't mean that the field is gone.
In the Kirlian photography, the electromagnetic field around an apple seed is a what? Have you seen that?
A heart? What is it the shape of? An apple? Oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah. Well, okay, this is what I'm going to be.
Did you catch that? Unreal. That would be fun to pull up those pictures, but and I think
those that's true for a strawberry and a blueberry. I don't know. Are they all doing the same thing?
I don't know. I would imagine on some level, and maybe we just don't know how to tune that instrument in just the right way. But I think these kinds of things would be imperative for young minds to get a hold of, to understand that these are happenings in our these are natural wonders that we can. I mean, there's great splendor in that, and I think that gives hope and intrigue into this experience. I think there's a lot of the way that our society is set up is running a lot of fear and a lot of parroting of just kind of regurgitating and stuffing information without a lot of creative process. I'm not saying there's some schools that are figuring that stuff out, but I think most kids would really trip out on that. And I think it would change the way they saw the world, and they would see intentionality if they had more exposure to these types of things. So back to where we're going. I like the idea of, where we're going. Aren't we talking about the future? And if we're talking about the future, we're talking about young ones learning. We talk about ourselves too, but what can we begin to learn that can impress upon future generations to keep this conversation going? And where would we like to see it go? What do we want? What would we love to, if we could just peek back, 1,000 years from now at what this species came up with, in this next chapter, the next chapter.
Well, I find it interesting to the question of where are we going from here, or where are we going? There's a lot that's put into that equation when you think about different philosophies, you think about different approaches to how to view life and the world, and you think, how can you define where you're going when there's so many different directions that one can go? There's so many different paths that any one person, any group of people, any race of people can follow, and yet there's if you think in terms of the earth as a whole, there is a big push to have everyone believe that the earth is in peril and that we are causing the earth to be in peril. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just saying that's one idea that's out there that says we are causing the world to its end. So that thought process propagates a whole line of approach which is going in a direction that some people will go and some people won't. If you think about it from the terms of the flat earthers, since we brought that up a couple weeks ago, their philosophy is solid for them. So where are they going? Well, they're going somewhere else. And so this idea that there's a one direction or a one place, I still come back to this idea that the only thing we have to worry about where we're going is right here, is the individual. Where are you going? Where am I going? And that goingness is an evolutionary process that's more expanded and deeper the more connected I am to that experience, to the depth of my own personal experience. And that depth then connects me in different ways to different people and different things and different experiences that move me on a trajectory that I can't say I know where it's going. I don't even pretend to know where it's going.
Do you think that has any bearing on where you land?
Does what have any bearing?
Not knowing where you're going.
I don't understand that question.
You just said you don't know where you're going.
Right.
Okay, so do you think that there is power in intention?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It focuses energy.
Okay, so if we have an intention of where we're, whatever that intention is about something we want to experience, that affects the movement, and so we might have a little bit more of a mapping of where we might be landing based on that intention. So I guess there's certain things that you and I have a tendency to not quite understand each other's verbiage sometimes, which I think is great because it opens my mind a lot, and thank you for that. But I hear you saying you don't know where you're going, but yet you know the power of intention. And so you could conceivably affect the idea of having an idea where you're going by just having a clear intention, right? Is that what?
Potentially.
Okay.
If indeed the idea is a destination. If the choice is that I have a destination in mind, then you set an intention and you go to the destination. If I want to go to the bathroom, my body is saying go to the bathroom, I set an intention to get off the couch.
So when you're asking us where are we going, is it a destination? On the heels of that, what is it a destination?
Well, that is the bigger part of that question.
Okay.
Well, and destination also too implies the constructs of time and space.
Yep.
Where the souls that inhabit these bodies are not tied to that experience. And again, scientifically, that doesn't get entered into the equation of how we look at what those things are sometimes. So when I say I don't know where I'm going, I know where I am right now.
Yeah.
And I may have a thought or a desire about where I might want to be, but it's not going to be without this. So me and this have to connect and line up to get to wherever that is.
Sure.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with any particular way to go, because there are people who can only live through the process of setting goals and setting rigid in the future things that they want to achieve or accomplish. So they make them a thing in the future, and then they direct all their focus to that, which is great. I mean, it works.
Yeah, it got you your education.
But it also can be a way of avoiding know thyself.
But here and now, indeed.
So it's kind of a rub. It's the place I'm at in my own world, in my own life right now, is what's happening in now. So I don't really have a clue where that's going. You know, we're gathering once a week to do this particular thing. You know, and it makes me scratch my head. I go, why the fuck are we doing this? Not in a bad way, just like, why am I doing this? Because it's interesting, and because it creates great feelings, and it's great to spend time with like-minded people and do this kind of, blah, blah, blah. But if I could say what the destination, where's it going? I think that's part of the evolutionary process. It's going to go where our energies decide and coalesce.
Precisely.
At some point.
Mm-hmm. And
each time we come together, it coalesces a little bit more. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it fragments a little. Sometimes it, so it's always a question of, for me, it's always interesting, the dynamic of where are we going? Is it because we set goals, or is it because we set intention, or is it because we evolved? Because we stayed in the present moment and allowed the present moment to evolve into the next moment, which allowed us to evolve even greater into that moment. And is it any different? Is that all saying the same thing in different language?
We could all be in the present moment within our own experience, but without someone like Jeff in my life to say, hey, get back to me. Are we doing this thing? Are we doing this? Having a little bit of the tacking toward where are we. It's nice to just sail around, but the idea of meeting, to me, is moving the needle forward on what I don't think we have to know what it is, but I think it's important to have a little bit of an understanding of an intention. And for me, the intention is always about compassion and kindness and inspiration, to be of some sort of service to help other people get what they're here to get. And hopefully there's some people with that same mindset that are, and I know you two guys are. And I think that just sort of, we don't have to know what the destination is, but I think having a little bit of a, for me, the idea, and I know you're being somewhat facetious, but to say what the F, am I doing here, or what the F are we doing with this kind of thing, to me that doesn't feel inspired, and I'm just looking at the languaging. And I understand what the implication is, but to me, where the F can we go with this thing? To me, has just a little bit more lift. It just has a little bit more love and intrigue. The way a good teacher can kind of lift us up into. But I just want to say thanks again for creating a space for us to do this. And I was thinking while we were talking about this, about how many times did it take Edison to get the light bulb going? I think it was thousands of tries. And he kept, I'm sure he was discouraged, but we're able to read this these lyrics.
All I know is it takes 3 licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop.
With the owl? I think he was the guy that could only last
That's
3 licks.
So a couple other fun things that would be great to poke around. I've read no less than 10 books on near-death experiences. And 3 of those books, I have a personal relationship with the author. I consider him to be a dear mentor. Dr. Melvin Morse practices medicine on the East Coast. Got me interested in exploring non-local perceptions and learning how to do controlled remote viewing.
And for those that don't know what that is.
Oh, go look it up. I don't feel like explaining it right now.
That's awesome.
That was nice, though, Timothy. I appreciate you doing that, but it's going to get me off
I understand.
my thought train of where the heck I was going with all this. That fear, back to that song, fear of dying, we can dump that. There has been so much work done on great minds documenting the near-death experience. And I don't like the idea of near-death experience because the only reason they throw that word near in there is it wasn't permanent. So people had a death experience, period. And it just wasn't a permanent one. It was a partial or temporary experience. So we call it near-death. But the sequence of events has been so well documented and seems to be so consistent. And one of the wonderful consistencies is there was no fear, and it did not hurt. That perhaps the body could be wreathing or writhing in pain and squealing and screaming and blah, 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 but the spirit soul is checked out. And we've maybe, I think, talked once before about at the moment of death that the human body changes weight, that there's a consistent amount of weight that leaves. And it seems to be more than just what the electrical current alone can because you can measure, like you plug in a cord, it weighs more plugged in than when it's unplugged, and you're actually measuring the weight of the energy in that cord. So more than just the amount of electrical current in the human body leaves the body at the moment of death. What that is, don't know. Most of us would like to call that the spirit, soul, or chi, or prana, or something like that. But so many people have documented this experience people have had that apparently there's a certain number, there's a certain percentage of folks throughout history in any given civilization or population that go, have this experience, come back and talk about it. And it's almost like a way of letting people know you really don't have to be afraid of this thing. Even if you wind up going through a wood chipper or getting eaten by a shark or 5 sharks or something. No matter how you go, the body's not going to dig it, but you are not your body in that moment. There's a separation that occurs. There seems to be a welcoming committee that shows up for most people. And as bizarre as this may sound, I'm willing to go there. Sometime within the last year, I was driving from Chula Vista back up to Oceanside. I had my boat at the harbor down there, and I was heading north, and I noticed all these twirly lights up ahead on the opposing lane. So there was this fatal accident that had occurred, and I was pretty close to it when it happened. Traffic had slowed down so that we were going by maybe 5 miles an hour or so. And as I looked over and I could see the mangled metal, I saw bodies lifted up out of that car. I saw a hologram. I saw a hallucination. I saw a reunion taking place of energy coming down and energy going up. And I started crying because I was connected to whatever that was happening. That was, I got to witness. I got to personally witness that experience of grandma and grandpa and coming down and saying howdy or however that was. And I was just like, I still remember that effect of like, it was just one of those, I have my mouth open right now just going, what was that? And it could have been completely my imagination of what I just imagined or expected to see. But I've learned since then to go, no, you were tuned into something. And that showed up in my screen that we call imagination. And my ego wants to own it, that it made it up, when in fact it was a real experience. That I got to get a little snapshot of what that was like. And you could say, well, that's because you've read all these books. You just got done saying you've read 10 books, so of course that's loaded in your mind, and of course you saw the circumstances, and of course it showed up that way. Well, screw all that. I want to stick with my...
Did it just seem more like light that was meeting light, or did they have like a certain kind of form? Or
there were. It was like a hologram.
Of a body.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, with clothes and all that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, no naked angels, Timothy. Sorry to disappoint you, but at least not in that version.
Wow.
But the emotion is what kind of convinced me that it was. More
and you didn't know it was
experience.
at that moment. You didn't know it was a fatal accident.
No, I had no idea.
Wow.
No. So near-death experiences is one way that we can know that there's something cool ahead, and that there's nothing to be afraid of in that experience. And so then you've got people that just focus and study near-death experiences. And then, so if you use that as kind of a baseline, particularly it's really cool to hear guys like Eben Alexander write the book Heaven is for Real, who was a staunch atheist and went out of his way to prove that there was nothing afterwards. And then he gets this viral meningitis and he goes into a coma and he has this heaven experience and his brain is literally dead, like the type of viral meningitis he had. And he's so able to discuss that the way that he was describing everybody else having these near-death experiences required certain parts of the brain to still be operative enough to put it all together to create the hallucination. He says, but mine was like dead. Like there was other neurologists that were like really trying to help him survive this coma experience that he was in. When he came back and had regained full consciousness, because they were like, he'll be brain dead, he'll never come back to consciousness again, this guy's a cookie, pulled a life, and like he's done. And he completely regained everything, got it all back again. And now his life's work is going around telling everybody, you know what, there really is something after this experience. So I absolutely love those stories.
His name one more time.
Eben Alexander, Dr. Eben Alexander. It's just like the Saul experience in the Bible of, let's go crucify those Christians, and then he becomes one. It's similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
And the
C.S.
same,
Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And William Bankston, the guy that wrote the book The Cure and got into the whole energy healing, was an Ivy League professor that went around going after people who were claiming to do energy healing, and then he went about to set it straight forever that this does not exist, and then through his own studies is having these experiences where these mice don't die. And so those are kind of fun. It's almost like whatever is out there is like, hey, let's play a really cool joke, and let's use somebody who's so much in this camp to at least bring them to here that they can now say, okay, well, there must be something to this. So if you're open to that and you're looking, you're going to find that. It'll be out there, this energy that just draws you toward there is nothing to be afraid of. There is something greater, grander. There is an evolutionary process. And it's something to look forward to. I don't know that I finished the discussion on the Penny Pierce's work with the frequency, but she talks about moving from empirical concrete formation of information in the left brain over to the right brain of intuitively knowing things, to where we wouldn't need cell phones any longer to be able to go back to a time. Many people talk about a time where ESP and not kinesiology, but telecommunications and telepathic...
Kinesis.
Thank you. And movement of energy, and just like we had it, we lost it, and could we get it back again? That's all where we're headed, into this fourth dimension. And she talks about the fourth dimension being a place where everybody that's operating in that dimension is only operating from love, and that fear doesn't exist in that place at all. She didn't call it heaven either. She just called it D4. And apparently in some other books, there are like 9 that we know of, 9 dimensions, each one being significantly more amazing than others.
Have you seen the video of the neuroscientist who has a stroke
Yes, I have.
I think that would be valuable to
She's
watch.
holding a brain and
Yeah.
a brain stem,
Yeah.
presenting the information. Yeah.
You know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
This lady she's teaching people about strokes, and she's teaching people about the brain. That's her job. And then one day she realizes, based on the symptoms that she's having a stroke. And the way she describes how her left brain just gets completely just quieted, where she can't figure out how to use the phone to call 911. It's just all these, but she's so fascinated, she's so at peace, because she's not running logic through it. She's just in this consciousness mode, this full consciousness mode, and it's a really beautiful tale, and I try to send that to people that are caught up in the left brain construct, and I don't think there's anything to be afraid of.
Right.
It doesn't not saying I wouldn't be afraid of slamming into the back of a big rig at the last moment or something like that, but that idea of what's next doesn't frighten me at all. It doesn't feel spooky. Maybe that's because I don't think I'm going to hell too. Yeah.
One of the takeaways I remember from that video was, in her only right brain state, that everything she saw was colors.
Oh, that's right.
And she could not imagine how all of her fit into this small human body. She was describing it like she was
right.
4 or 5 times bigger, and somehow had to push herself all into this small human body. Yeah, that's special when those sorts of things show up from someone who could describe it and articulate it in a way that would help the rest of us grab it.
Have you gotten into any of Abraham Hicks?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Have you gotten into?
Can't get enough of that material.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Seth books?
Yeah.
You really?
Mm-hmm.
Seth is a little dense.
What's that?
Seth is a little dense.
It's a little dense. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Very dense.
Yeah. Wait, how a few bars? What did you got any takeaways from?
The Abraham Hicks stuff resonates with me. I haven't come across anything that I could say, well, I don't get it, it doesn't make sense, or I love their vortex theory. It works. It just works. I mean, it pretty much, that's the way everything works, is through a vortex. I love, at this point in my life, when people suggest books that have been written by humans. I put them on my desk, and they might get read at some point, but the books that are written through off-Earth intelligence, they're the ones that are on the top of my pile. And that's where I would put Abraham Hicks material.
Yeah.
Is that they're through channeling, through some kind of mediumship or seer or something. And that's kind of a holy book when you put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't want to be religious when I say holy, but there's a level of spirituality in that type of material that resonates with me more so than somebody that is Ivy League educated or whatever and got all the letters behind their name and writes a book.
So imagine the Jeff that was flying the jet. What would he think about what you're saying right now?
Wouldn't know that guy. Yeah.
Would he be a little threatened? Would he just kind of just blow it off, make fun of it? I mean, what would
make fun of it.
Okay.
Wouldn't come to this party.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Because I was thinking about that fringe demographic that you were describing. I was thinking that we needed to have a Christian response to each of these iterations. But what would you say about, you said mediumship, and I could just picture, you know, the Puritanistic folks.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get the stake out and burn them. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, not anymore. Same thing with anybody that was playing around with tarot cards or any of that other stuff. You know, back then that was all heresy and Satanism.
Work of the devil.
Right
Absolutely.
up there with sacrificing babies. You know.
Absolutely.
And now that I've actually taken the time to get to know the people, they're beautiful, sweet, amazing people.
And tuned
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not causing any problems.
No.
And they really aren't.
They're really not.
I don't think Jesus is up there going to those folks. Not at all. If anything, it's probably quite the opposite. Something I'd like to put out, something that we're evolving toward or growing toward, this idea that seeing another person as an other, rather than seeing another person as yourself, that we're moving toward that.
Yeah.
That would be a great baseline or definition of evolving.
Dig it. And on that front, there have been many instances where I was brought up with a lot of fear, and so I was taught that people that didn't look like me, I need to be cautious about, or like make sure that I look like I could kick some ass, you know, walking through certain parts of town or whatever the case might be. But what I found is that when people feel like you see them, and they feel seen and appreciated, like guys I know would have loved to have jumped me in what is that, Visalia. I just gave them a warm good evening, gentlemen, you know, and they sensed something, and the guy ended up telling me later that they just looked at me and had an idea of who they thought I was, but because they had warmth and they had this idea that like this guy saw me, you know, it broke something down in that us versus them, and the next thing you know, they're making sure that like, you don't want to keep walking down this street right here. This is not a good spot for you, you know. It's a good spot. My uncle owns this place. Come on in. They fed me. They guys that had ill intent, and they told me this, just based on how I looked. They sensed something about my heart, and it's a really beautiful moment for me to recount. But I feel that happening. I feel that happening, and personally, I feel that happening, and I understand people who are so caught up in the rhythm of this identity of this is me, and you're threatening what I have, but whenever it's just all we want is to feel seen and to feel loved and appreciated and respected on some level, and I just as easily could have turned into something completely different, and at an earlier time in my life it probably would have. When you were flying jets, it probably would have been a bad night for me. But because I just have more openness to all, and I don't know, it's a... How do you feel like we can be more... We can lose the divide of the us and them? Is there any practices that you see, or any awarenesses that... Do you experience that at all, and not necessarily in how you have yourself set up, but do you feel other people's ideas about our lives being different, or the way our minds work, or anything? Do you have anyone in your world, in your family, and in your any colleagues that are just kind of narrow-minded and perpetuating the idea of us versus them kind of thing? Is that you aware of that sensation?
No, I mean not in my immediate environment. I've been having an interesting experience with one of my brothers, because he has taken a tack politically which has never happened before. But it's very reminiscent of a time period in his life when he was also a Southern Baptist. He kind of went all in.
Right.
And that's a little disconcerting. But no, I mean, I think because
does he get you at all? I mean, like,
oh yeah,
okay,
yeah. Actually, when I first shared my book with him, he was a little overwhelmed by it because his words were, "I never read." He said, "Usually when I read something, I'm always kind of going, what was that book I read? What was that?
Yeah.
What was that thing? I'm trying to remember what I read." And he said this was really different because I was experiencing it while I was reading it. So I was having an experience in my own experience.
Nice job.
It was answering my questions, so I didn't have to go recall.
Yeah.
So yeah, the interesting thing in the dynamic now is just because he's chosen to narrow his field for reasons I don't understand, and so there's a little more disconnection than didn't used to be. But it's.
Do you have any techniques of quelling that divide that you didn't have before?
Don't engage it.
Yeah. It takes two, doesn't it? That's what I try to tell people all the time that are complaining about someone else's energy, and then that affects their energy, and then it's this vicious cycle that just feeds on itself. Don't engage it.
Yeah, because there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to change his viewpoint, and there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to make him want to change that viewpoint.
And the only thing that could potentially change it is you remaining steadfast toward your ideas of love and compassion and understanding, and just being like this badass guy that just has a steady course, and you're not running the fear channel,
right? Some people,
and you're digging your life. It's hard. There are people that really have a difficult time, I have found, with the fact that I really enjoy my life, and I figured out a way to really be happy and feel good, and that's disconcerting. It's not like you're not working hard enough, or you're not sweating enough, you're not bleeding enough, and it's just like that. God, you don't, that's
not what we're here for.
That's not what we're here for. Exactly.
Maybe what
it's
you're
not
here
where
for.
we're going.
Yeah, that's the challenging part is people recognizing, but I think because of the element of the fear entrainment, it makes it very hard to really figure out where we're going, because in that consciousness of fear, all you can do is plot.
Right.
All you can do is say, well, okay, in order to be a good human being, I have to do A, B, C, and D, according to the mass conscious ideal of what that is. So now I have a plot. Now I have to do. And the problem with that is that there's no being involved. So the process of growth and change, be, do, have, becomes thwarted into a do, have thing and no beingness. Well, without beingness, you don't have any source. Without any source, your body deteriorates and you create disease.
And what I hear is a call. What I hear in all that, and I know you're not a fan of the idea of being called, but I hear a call to humanity to be in the beingness, and I think that's part of what we all do on the daily. What we're here to do, what we're best at is to. And so, what are some ways that we can help people in their beingness? Just brainstorming. What are some?
Be at peace. Let go of fear and anxiety and worry. Be present.
And how do people do that? Because people understand those words, but there's a lot of people locked in. What are some of the?
How'd you do it? There's a purpose to my question.
I dig it. There was.
You don't even have to answer the question. The answer just happened.
Yeah.
the only way you got there was navigating the course of your experience.
It's funny you
finding
say
out who I am.
It's funny
who you are.
It's funny that you say navigating, because I was listening and navigating by my own North Star. I don't know where it came from, because people ask me all the time, like, how did you get out of that redneck noise that, just was so predominant? All the people I love and care about are still so in those gears of that old, farm equipment, just being like just ground in. There was something that spoke to me that there's a better way. There's an up leveling that can happen here. And is this the best use of my time? When I would be around people that were just caught up in fear and scarcity, and I just thought, what am I carrying into this equation? What are my cards that I can play? What's the hand that I play at this juncture? And I kept looking at that and seeing, oh yeah, well, I got some forgiveness to work on. I don't know where all that came from, because I know a lot of people that have tons of stuff that it's just a big, like, aneurysm inside of them that's just ready to burst at any moment, and they're unaware of how to begin accessing it. And I think that there's a certain amount of courage that's required for all of us that have transcended and named our dragons. I mean, that's, to answer your question, I know you were being rhetorical, but I think it's important to see what makes us tick. Getting to a place, for me personally, was I really wanted to understand how thick or thin on ice I was skating on. This happened right after my dad had taken his life. A lot of things that I've been considering on the sidelines was all kind of coming center field now. It's like, okay, wow, this is, all my siblings have been institutionalized, and my father just, went this way. And so I just felt like this was a really precious gift to be here, and I wanted to get the most out of it. And the way I had been shown, and all the predecessors, their idea of doing it wasn't clicking for me. Mm-hmm. And that all has to do with tuning into my heart. And I've always cared about what has heart and meaning. Mm-hmm. And when people are arguing ideas and stances and all this kind of stuff, I mean, there's little bits of that I can, kind of understand or get into, but the only thing I really understand is when people are in their hearts. And if I'm in environments where people aren't speaking what has heart and meaning to them, I am a fish out of water. And I think that discomfort of being a fish out of water around a lot of the left brain banter that's gone on in our world has been my saving grace. That's what's been a huge motivator for me. It's just largely being terribly uncomfortable with the status quo and wanting to understand what makes me tick and seeing what I can flush, because I don't want to carry a bunch of extra weight.
But until any individual finds that, at least from my perspective, that it's a very it becomes a very, very challenging path to try to drag them anywhere near it until they're ready.
Indeed, and dragging. But here's the thing, because I know just by looking at you and how you speak that you have inspired tons of people to just go, wait a minute, I don't need to be carrying. This is ridiculous. I like what this guy's got going on, and you've inadvertently touched countless lives as a result of how you chose to be. And so not everybody has your X factor. Right. Not everybody has the grit that led us all to be drawn to these kinds of experiences. And I think that there is a little bit of a tailwind of momentum that happens when we've done our work, and I think people can fall in to some really quiet waters in our wake, as we might. Does that make any sense at all?
Well, yeah, because it speaks exactly to what Jeff brought up earlier. The concept of the different colors, or whether
Yeah.
it's different levels of consciousness, or whether it's coming into this experience in different places that, that in that way we are all connected, and in that way we continue the process of evolution, because, and this is something that Abraham Hicks talks about all the time. You can't be anybody other than you. You're never going to get it all done, and it's never going to be finished.
Yeah.
So if you lose those concepts, you're going to be a lot happier, because you're not going to be driving to, some end result, which is never going to, you're never going to get. And the other one is there's no bottom. I love that one. There is no bottom.
Wow.
There is no bottom. But so there are people who are probably more finely tuned to listen, like we apparently have been through our lives. I mean, for me, it's never been a question. It's been there as long as I can remember. When I stood outside of my parents' house when I was 15 years old, after having stolen the car and drove out and gotten laid, and my mother discovered I was gone and locked the screen doors, and I had a key to the house, and I stood there and went, "Yeah, no, not playing this one. Bye." Never went back.
Wow.
Walked 5 miles into the nearest town. So I never went back.
Wow.
Because that's, it wasn't a oh my God, what am I going to do? It was, okay, what's next?
That just shifted.
Yeah. Here we go.
Next adventure.
Next adventure.
Uh-huh.
And that's been my whole life.
Huh.
In that fashion, in some form or another. That, and I'm sure yours has been as well. That sense of guidedness.
Right.
Let's push just a little bit deeper, a little bit farther.
Let's do it.
Is it of any interest to you guys that up to this point in our discussion of where are we going, and the word where are we going, implies there's a destination. Is it, I don't know how long this video or this podcast has been going at this point, but we haven't mentioned the word heaven one time, or Valhalla, or Abraham's bosom. Or...
He mentioned hell once and said he wasn't. Because he said he wasn't going there.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Hell, right? Yeah,
But
but
he did not have it.
right. But any of these terms of places, these, whether they're real or imagined or energy sorts or whatever, well, that didn't come up in our discussion at all. Do you find that interesting? This far into.
I think when you were flying jets, I would have, but now, no. I think if it was interesting, it would have found its way on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
But think about, those are the terms that have been used from the beginning.
Yeah.
Some iteration of nirvana, utopia, heaven, whatever the Greeks or even the people before them would talk about. We haven't used any of those terms tonight. I find that pretty interesting.
How so? What's
They just didn't come up. They didn't come up at all.
But I think that's part of the evolution of our consciousness. I think that people have needed to feel like they had some sort of insurance. I think there's a lot of scarcity and insecurity about this life and this. For me personally, I feel like I've got a lot of heaven right here on this planet, and I choose it. And I watch a lot of people choosing hell on this earth, and to me, that's the only now and the only reality that I have to play with is what can I create as far as that goes. I don't know if there's all of the stories of nirvana, heaven, are from books that are full of holes and contradictions and written by man and during some pretty interesting times of people really seeking what they couldn't understand. And those same books were making statements about the natural world that they obviously didn't know about. And if these were divine books, they would have known about the physical world that they were trying to describe, that they were just inept in. So it's a nice concept, but I don't really like being around people, like a bunch of people. And so like heaven's is a source of anxiety. And I never thought of that before, but like that doesn't, like streets of gold and praising, like for eternity, that just sounds like hell to me.
Yeah.
That sounds awful.
Well, I think if we tie back to our first conversation in that room, which I think was our second podcast, the thing that you and I agreed with in an answer to a similar question was that we see it as in continuity. So there isn't a sense of end. There's just a sense of continuing. So why would you think of a place if that's not what you're aiming for? And that's what immediately came to mind for me, was remembering that conversation. But that's
singing Amazing Grace for eternity. Just
oh, good Lord.
It would lose its sweet sound.
It would lose. Yeah, I think so.
Four bars.
4 bars.
And how many times could you cast your crown right at the feet of the Lamb?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, do you have a sense that there may be something like Nirvana, Jeffrey?
I believe from what... So here's how I come to my beliefs. Books first. But the thing that I find... I'm almost giddy that on if not a daily basis, at least, and sometimes multiple times a day, but let's just say on average 3 times a week, I have the opportunity to do what I'm calling afterlife connection therapy, where people want to engage with a departed loved one or tapping into some entity that's no longer on the planet. And after they're done doing their work of whatever questions they want answered, I take the rest of the time to ask them to ask the other person questions about what that experience is like. And I get paid to do it. It's like, how good is that, right? So what I'm going to challenge you to consider, Timothy, is imagine that if you had agreed and you were brave and daring enough to want to ask your dad what his experience is like right freaking now, assuming he hasn't moved on, and there's a lot of ideas that were in that place. I'm not going to give it a name, but the best one I could come up with is the afterlife.
Okay.
And that only describes after this life, and it's not like a permanent place.
Right,
it's just a holding place, planning place for what's next. That if you were willing to, perhaps in a future podcast, let me create that experience for you.
Ooh.
What that would be like to connect that again. And I absolutely, whatever, if there is any negativity you have in connection with your dad, it would instantly go away.
Yeah.
And there would be a new, see how I did that?
Yeah.
Ooh, doing it to myself. There would be a new...
Was that the EMDR thing?
Yeah, energy that you would have about all of that.
Yeah, I don't feel... I don't have any conscious awareness about any negativity toward that. And I was just describing that to someone recently, that...
Well, even the part about, you said he took his life.
Yeah.
There is some negativity associated just in our society of...
Right.
That's kind of a downer, it leaves a stigma on the family behind.
It's a point on the map, it's a point of reference that to me doesn't have any eddies. There's no backwater in that as I speak it, because that ended up being the catalyst for some of the most extraordinary growth of my life. And I don't think if that hadn't happened, I think that I would have been sort of in some backwaters for a while. I think that was a really fine point put on some karmic energy that I got to figure out what I wanted to do with that generational stuff that had been going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get to, and I got to forgive it and love it. And so when I think of that man now, I don't run the story of him not being there, or, you know, I mean, what the story is that I don't even have a lizard.
Right.
Wait, hang on. But I don't have a cat or a lizard or a fish. And this guy had 4 kids. Like, he got me here, and so that's just pure gratitude for the man.
Sure.
And that's very, very different. Please go ahead.
I wasn't going there at all. Where I was going is, hey, Dad, what are you doing now?
I want to do that.
Look around.
I think that
Tell me what that's like.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I get to do that like 3 times a week.
I'd be down for that.
And people describing that experience, and I'm just busily writing it down. And I've actually gotten to videotape a few of them, and you know, those are the. So that's how I can have a discussion like this, and it's so much more real to me.
Sure.
Because I'm getting to show up and have those experiences, not just a 1 or 2 time kind of a thing, but this is my life now. Anytime somebody comes in my office and they tell me that they have a dead relative, I get so excited because I know at some point we're probably going to tap into that, and that's going to be a resource.
Can you get a sense from where you sit and of the type of? Can you get a sense of what that person was like at times?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Their personality, their energy.
Yeah. Well, it's like I'm seeing it too, in a way. Yeah. And some people it's really private and personal, and other people it's just like they're so willing to share it. But there's always a big, powerful emotion that's taking place there.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if they're really having that experience. I don't know if that's what's really showing up.
Yeah.
But it's powerful, whatever it is.
Sure. So yeah, I'd be game for that. And the only reason why I was getting off on that little tangent is that you had mentioned that if there was any negativity or anything, I just wanted to let you know that it would be more about like discovery, like where are you and what's.
Wouldn't it be cool for Dad to be able to share why he did it?
Yeah.
And he hasn't gotten to tell you guys that part of what was going on for him.
I like that intention. I do. I'd be absolutely open to that.
I can imagine now at a future family reunion. Yeah, I got to talk to Dad the other day. And he kind of told me. Yeah. And your family would be going. I just made a funny face for those listening. Yeah, sure you did. So that's how
do you experience them now?
If I really tune in, there's times when I'm on the beach and maybe I'm going for a walk or something. I'll just invite him along. There was a psychic that worked with Janis Joplin and Andy Warhol and Jim Morrison, and his name was Chuck Von Wine. And there's a famous picture of Andy Warhol coming out of a manhole with a camera. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And there's a guy sitting next to, it was Chuck and Edie, Chuck Von Wine. So I met him at a coffee shop in Encinitas many years ago, back when you were still, kind of, I call it flying jets, but you know what I'm talking about. And I met this guy, and he was the seer for all these people. And this guy, fascinatingly enough, had just gone to China to heal the psychic wounding of Genghis Khan's land route through Asia. His guides had been just not letting him get any rest because there were people he had to go solve some things with and whatever. And so there were people at the airport that met him who he had never had any sort of correspondence in this matrix, but all the guides had worked out the details so he had places that he would go and show up, and people knew that he was coming. So that was kind of my first exposure to the idea of something like that. I was intrigued by it, but I thought I was cheating on Jesus to have too much of that conversation. I love saying that. I just felt like that was the really wrong thing to do. It was like taking a shower with my socks on. It just didn't feel right. So anyway, back to your question. Can you?
It's gone.
Okay.
It wasn't his question, it was mine.
I'm sorry. All you guys are the same to me. What was the question?
It probably doesn't matter.
No, please.
I just asked you if you
Oh, if he talks to you.
if you communicate with
Thank
him.
you. So,
And somehow we ended up in
because, and let me tell you something.
China.
And that is such a perfect little example of, my friends call it the dune buggy. There's just times when the dune buggy gets off. So Chuck Von Wine at Swami's Cafe, as he and I were talking, he goes, "Who is the gentleman in the green military suit that's standing to your left?" And my father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and Chuck could see him, and so that spooked me, and I was intrigued, but I didn't know how to be open to, because based on my my upbringing. So according to Chuck, he's around, and he may be around, and he may be a source of why I have so much peace, because I was able to forgive and transcend, and maybe that karmic awakening has allowed him to see that there is another way that this could go. Because I guess we're a lot alike, according to people that knew us both, because I didn't really know the guy. But I'll invite him to go on, sometimes I'll invite him to go on walks on the beach, and it's just more of a, like a wise grandpa that you just get to be near, and there's this kind of osmosis thing, but it's not a huge interaction. So I don't consciously conjure my dad, but when I do, it doesn't seem like he's that far away, and it just seems kind of like a steady Tonto.
Yeah, we have a friend of mine died a year ago, and we have fun with him because he still shows up a lot.
Oh wow!
And it was the anniversary of his death was just a week ago.
Oh wow!
And
1 year?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was funny. We were at dinner with his wife, who was also our good friend, and just got into this conversation about all the ways he'd showed up in the last 2-3 days, and just the strange shit that went on in each of our own experiences. And he shows up around me a lot, and I can feel him, I can hear him. But more essence, more presence.
Yeah.
But there are times that it's Tim. I mean, it's just, and he'll, to the point that I'll be bent over laughing because whatever just happened was, his presence created that kind of experience. It's
Do you feel that with all loved ones, or just particular ones?
I actually have not had
anyone else
much death in my experience. Actually, that's not true. I've had plenty of death in my experience, just not my family.
Okay.
So I've worked. I've done a lot of work with people. I've had people die in my arms. I've had helped people die. I've done, but as far as family members go, there's a lot that are dead, but I wasn't close to them or didn't know them very well. So.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too. Is that I didn't know the guy very well, so it's for me the catharsis was recognizing that what I hoped that might happen someday wasn't going to happen, and just kind of coming to terms with that. And so when I did, I just felt like this. Literally, I felt like an elephant stepped off of my chest. An elephant that I didn't know had been there my whole life, and I had this this huge breath, and just because I had done a lot of deep work on the idea of my father in a seminar that I was involved with, and I got a chance to approach a guy that was mimicking a man about my father's age in a grave, and I got to go and have whatever conversation I needed to have, and that was my fourth time to have conversations with my dad. There was 2 funerals in Texas and 1 in LA for him, and then this was like a mock funeral, and it was just this interesting thing, and I was just shaking in my boots and didn't know why, but I was finally clear. I finally moved enough stuff to the side to where I could fully be present for the forgiveness, and I didn't know that's what I needed, but one of the facilitators just said, "Do you have anything you need to say to your dad?" And I'm just looking at this guy, and I was shaken, and it was like all of my story and all my protectiveness about where he was and wasn't in my upbringing, and all these conversations, it was like, what did I do wrong? And all that stuff just dissipated, and all I could see was a guy that gave me life, and I was just absolutely, I just began crying and laughing, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that this was such a difficult time for you. But thank you, like all that anguish turned to gratitude, and the moment that I made that decision to just be grateful is when I felt this, and you could see it in my body back then. I had something that was here, and my physical body changed when I let go of that and moved into that. And that's the last time I had bouts of depression. Isn't that interesting?
It is, yeah.
We've sort of derailed from pretty much anything we were talking about.
Thank you.
Probably should end the session. Not that we can't continue the conversation, just it isn't really pertinent to what we're at.
You want to offer a summary?
Do I want to offer a summary?
Try to pull it all together?
Where have we been on the journey of tonight? So we started with the question of where are we going, and it's gone into a lot of different directions. We looked at and talked about science and spirituality. We talked about the death experience and where are we going in terms of where this life is taking us, and is there a destination like a heaven or a hell? And we didn't really spend any time talking about those because it doesn't appear that we really resonate to those ideas very much.
Yeah.
But we kind of agreed and came to a consensus on the idea of know thyself as a way of forging the path forward, as a way of finding that connection,
trusting
to evolving wherever that next now is. Some of that was about realizing that the now is what we have, and then we talked. I talked for a minute about the be do have process and the lack of beingness, and that sort of stimulated some conversation. From the beginning back to the song, which sort of started this whole thing, we did talk about a bit about fear. We didn't dive too deeply into that, although we talked about the entrainment process and where how heavily that impacts the where we go, where are we going, because it creates a much more limited experience of where we can go. And I think there were lots of references and things, but that's...
A big takeaway that I got was your bringing up of the afterlife experiences and how that's replete throughout societies worldwide. What is interesting about a lot of the afterlife experiences is that if there are any supernatural experiences, it is somewhat related to the demographics, who they see and like what entity they see is, based on what religion they were brought up in, and things. The stuff that I've read, and I haven't read what you're talking about, but I want to read what you're talking about, because when there's a certain amount of consistency in people's experiences, I think there's credence there, and so that's its own data that I want to get into that. I want to check that out. So I think maybe look around and see what I can find to bring more to our next conversation about that. But I feel a lot of what's happening and where things are going, where we're going as a species, has to do with what we carry in our hearts and what our intentions are. And I like the idea. I remember the Bible said that where two or more are gathered, this is our own little new way of doing what we once craved. We wanted to talk about what was really, whatever we want to talk about, we get to talk about in this format. And I think that there's power in that. I think there's liberation in that. I think that those ideas bouncing together create things that we can't even begin to imagine are going to happen as a result of this elemental stew that we're borrowing from. So,
and I think it speaks to, we were talking about law of attraction a bit, and that the reference to being on the leading edge, as they say, is that idea that the thoughts that we generate, the ideas that we present, the concepts that we explore are furthering and expanding consciousness in its own right. And that just by virtue of that, by showing up in that space, the power of one who's dialed in is greater than 10,000 that are not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my final spin on our conversation tonight, in agreeing with Jim's very eloquent summary and Timothy's addition to that, would be this: if someone were to ask me the question, "Where are we going?" and I was only given a sentence or two to answer the question, my attempt would be to describe it in a way that we are going toward a higher frequency through each iteration of our experiences that we've had here, and that in that higher frequency we would arrive at a point where we could see that there is only love.
Absolutely.
And that's where we would spend time in interacting in that place, but still having ongoing experiences. There is no final resting point. There is no end to all of it. It just continues.
Mm-hmm.
So why not pick love?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right, folks, I think we're going to wrap it for tonight. And we'll look forward to getting together again next week.
Yes.
Until next time.
Until next time.